Hi, I'm Dr. Kurt Van Ader, a veterinarian with Purina here in St. Louis, Missouri. As a leader in pet nutrition and pet health, Purina is proud to partner with Tractor Supply to answer your pet owner's questions. So in this case, we have a dog that has both allergies and is overweight. So I'd first like to start with the allergies because I think we'd like to make sure we understand what's going on and what we can do. When it comes to allergies, pet owners have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of confusion out there, I think in part because of information that may not be the most accurate online. While the internet's a wonderful thing and you can find a plethora of great information, the reality is you always want to make sure that you're looking at credible, reliable sources, and I always say talk to your veterinarian. So when you think about allergies, there are three main types of allergies that we see in dogs. The first and the most common is what we call flea bite allergy or flea bite dermatitis. And this is where we see those lesions, usually at the base of the tail. In tough conditions, it can lead to hot spots. That's the first and by far the most prevalent. The second one are seasonal allergies, or what we call atopy. This is where the dog is allergic to things in the environment. Could be molds, could be pollens, could be dusts. And the third, and certainly the far less frequent cause of allergies, is food. Yet if you jump online, there are all sorts of people out there saying, oh, it must be a food allergy, my dog's allergic to wheat, it's allergic to corn. The reality is that food allergies account for probably less than 5% of all the allergies we see in dogs. And it's interesting to note that it's the protein source usually that's the offending allergen, or the nutrient that's actually causing the problem in the dog. So I'd first recommend that you consult your veterinarian, try to get to the bottom of what's actually causing those allergies, and your veterinarian can then make a recommendation based on food, based on medical therapy, based on seasonality that's going to be most appropriate for your dog. Now, when we move to being overweight, I'm glad you asked this question, and I'm glad you recognize that your pet is overweight. Obesity is the most common condition that we see in our dogs and cats, and it's a condition that can lead to a variety of different health complications. When you think about dogs, when they're carrying excess weight, that's excess pressure on those joints. It can lead to osteoarthritis of the hip, of the elbow, of the knee, etc. So it's very important to make sure that you feed your dog to ideal body condition. Look at the recommendation on the back of the bag, speak to your veterinarian, and you have to recognize that if your dog is really obese, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some work, and it's going to take some portion control. But if you're consistent, if you're committed to it, a little more exercise, it's good for you and it's good for your dog, you'll be able to get them back down to that ideal body condition. So in this particular case, what I'd recommend is work with your veterinarian, let's figure out the allergies, and then over time you can work on the overweight issue. So the question that came in is, my dog is eating chicken poop. Is that a health risk for him? And what do I need to be concerned about? Admittedly, this is not a question we get often, but we do get it every once in a while, and I think it's a really good question. The reality is, yes, if your dog is eating chicken poop, it can be a health concern. The thing that pops to the top of my mind is a risk of salmonella. Now, most dogs, if they're healthy in their middle age, they have less of a risk of salmonella. But we do need to be concerned about those individuals with a developing immune system, puppies, as well as those that may have an immunocompromised state, such as older dogs, because we know as dogs age, their immune system doesn't work as well. So I'd say that if you're dealing with a puppy or your dog's a little bit older, there's a greater risk of salmonella and the issues that come along with that. I think the bigger concern for me isn't necessarily the risk to your dog, although that certainly is a concern, but it's the risk to humans in your family. This is what we call the potential for a zoonotic disease, a disease that can be transmitted between pets and people. So my biggest concern in this question is that if your dog does eat chicken poop, you certainly don't want him to come up, lick your child, lick the grandmother's hands at the dinner table, because there's a chance of disease spread. So what I'd recommend is, and it's probably pretty simple and obvious, try to keep your dog away from the chicken coop or from just free range out in the yard with the chickens. So we've got an owner with 3 healers, 2 of which are 33 pounds and the other is 66 pounds. It's important to recognize if you're looking for one diet for all dogs, you have to make sure that your dogs are in what we call ideal body condition. That's the state we really want them to be in. At Purina, we've done a lot of work looking into obesity and how to manage obesity. As we know, both in cats and dogs, obesity can have negative health complications, especially in dogs. Think about things like osteoarthritis. So when it comes to this particular question, I think we first have to assess what is the body condition of these 3 dogs. There's a chance this 66-pounder just is a much larger dog, has a larger frame, bigger bones. So you can't necessarily make a strong recommendation without actually performing a physical exam and assessing their ideal body condition. When I talk about ideal body condition, one of the things you can look for as an owner are really 2 things, I would say. One, you want to see an abdominal tuck when you look at your dog from the side, and if you stand above your dog and look down, you want to see a nice hourglass shape towards the end. What that means is your dog doesn't have a lot of fat pads on the side or on his upper back. So when you think about ideal body condition, you have to think about the fact that different foods have different caloric densities, and you want to make sure that you're feeding the appropriate amount to the dogs. In addition to differences in size, we also have to consider differences in activity level. Some dogs are simply more active than others, and it makes sense that if one is sitting on the couch as a couch potato and the other is out running around the yard all day long, one is going to need fewer calories versus the other. So my recommendation would be to, next time you're in with your veterinarian, let him perform an ideal body condition assessment on all 3 dogs, and he or she will be able to make a good recommendation on what you can feed all 3. So we have a senior dog, and the question is, what should I be feeding my active 14-year-old senior dog? Great question, and one we get often in veterinary practice. First, we want to make sure that your dog is not over-conditioned and is in what we call ideal body condition. That means you can feel their ribs when you pet them. You can see an hourglass shape from above when you look down. From the side, you see an abdominal tuck. So if we assume that this dog is in good shape, they are an active dog, then the question becomes, well, what should I be feeding them? Do I need to feed them an adult formula? Do I need to feed them a senior formula? Are there differences between the 2? And the answer is yes, there are differences between the 2. At Purina, we've done a lot of research looking into how to best feed and nourish these senior dogs. And we found a lot of very interesting things. Our older senior dogs actually require more protein than we previously thought. So in many of our formulas, when it comes to our senior diets, you'll see that they have a higher protein to calorie ratio. And that's important because protein is what helps maintain our lean muscle mass. That's the metabolically active tissue. That's the tissue we want to keep. And so by feeding them a high protein to calorie ratio, as they get older, it'll help keep them healthy and strong. You know, should I add a raw egg to my dry dog food is a question we will often get asked in vet practice. And I think it's important to note that both the American Veterinary Medical Association and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control recommend against feeding raw, which includes both raw meat and raw egg, because this can bring in harmful bacteria. And this bacteria can be harmful, salmonella, not only to your dog, but also to people in the household.